Hey, you're watching my official compilation channel, but if you want to see my newest videos as soon as they're uploaded, check out my main channel, Chat History. Alright, enjoy the video. Well, that was quite the entrance you've made, but you couldn't have picked a worse time to fall out of the sky. Looks like you've landed in Salem, Massachusetts. You know, the place with all of the witches and whatnot? Yeah, that one. Now don't be fooled. It may seem like a simple, peaceful, and wholesome village. Tread carefully, because one wrong move could have you swinging from a rope. So, do you think you could survive this Puritan hellhole? Let's find out. Welcome to Salem, Massachusetts. Founded in 1626, the settlement of Salem quickly established itself as a bastion for English Puritans. They were a group of religious nutjobs who sailed over from across the pond after facing religious persecution. Basically, their religion was a tad too crazy, even for the Church of England. You see, Puritans wholly believed that they were God's chosen few, that only they would be allowed through the cloud-covered pearly gates and everyone else could kick rocks. In hell. They also believed that Big Red Spirit Halloween Satan himself roamed the earth, wreaking havoc as a full-time job. Anything odd or inexplicable was the devil's doing, and any acts of the devil were met with swift punishment. Excuse me, what are you doing? Oh, just having a whistle. Oh. Not in this village, you're not. Pardon me, what are you doing? Oh, for fuck. Being a Puritan society, religious figures were the ones that ruled, and the biblical texts were the rules. Whatever the book says goes, with no room for improvisation. The church itself controlled everything, from the way you walked to the way you talked, from how you were dressed to what you'd ingest. But the church often stressed how you should feel blessed, so if you've ever felt repressed, you must confess or be placed under arrest. Gotta love a concentrated society of religious fanatics. What could go wrong? Right? Fast forward several decades, and here we are in a cold January in 1692, the start of a new year for the town. Well, you've got to get to fitting in, so best introduce yourself.
Good morrow.
Hello.
Pardon?
Bad move. The word hello won't be used as a greeting for another 100 years.
Thou art not from around hither, art thou?
No?
Methought so.
Try again.
Good morrow.
Good morrow. That's better. Remember, the great thing about a small village like this is that everyone knows each other. The worst thing is that everyone knows each other. But it looks like you're about to run into someone familiar?
Dude!
Ron? Is that you?
Yes, sir.
Where the hell did you come from?
Well, I saw this cool little green portal thingy and jumped right on through. Heck of a ride. Wouldn't do it again, though. It inverted my belly button and made me piss myself. Anyway, look who I found.
Who's that?
This loose slab of butter right here is my great something or other Uncle Jimothy, Salem's finest blacksmith, so I've been told.
Oi, how'd you figure that out?
Well, I asked him. Anyways, where were we?
I think we were just talking about... The hell was that?
Let's check it out.
Oh boy, the two girls pitching a fit on the ground are none other than 12-year-old Abigail Williams and 9-year-old Betty Paris. Their actions are about to set forth quite a series of unfortunate events, and they won't even star Jim Carrey. Looks like this calls for a doctor's opinion. Hi, this be a case of witchcraft.
No way.
If there's one place you don't want to be in this world, it's being in the middle of a religion-obsessed community that's been given the news that the devil himself may be walking amongst them. The news of the girl's possible bewitchment set the entire village of Salem completely on edge. Despite a solid month of good old homemade remedies like fasting, burning herbs, Jorkin crystals, or that iconic prayer mumbo-jumbo, nothing seemed to work. Were the girls just joshing? Or was something more malevolent lurking in the shadows? Samuel Paris, the town's minister and father to Itty Bitty Betty, was desperate for answers. Finally, someone offered a more creative approach. Entering stage left is Samuel's neighbor, Mary Sibley. Entering stage right are Sam Paris's personal servants, John Indian and Tituba.
They're slaves.
Together, the three concocted a plan to fight fire with fire. Since desperate times call for desperate measures, this brought the concept of counter magic to the table. Although a potential solution, however a bunch of baloney it may be, the act of performing counter magic was just as offensive in the eyes of Puritans as black magic, and just as dangerous.
Shoo-ba-da-boo!
But what are you gonna do? Just let your daughter or niece scream and flail about on the ground like they were told no at a toy store? Didn't think so. So, Reverend Paris did what he had to do. The proposed solution? Just bake a cake. Now, it's easy to bake a pretty cake, but you gotta do the cooking by the book. And this is the book. So, this is the cake. Made from a mix of rye flour and, I shit you not, a cup of the afflicted's own urine, this disgusting dessert was then offered to the Paris' dog as a way to ward off these sinister symptoms and, in turn, cause physical harm to the witch responsible for casting the curse. Shockingly, it didn't work. And to make matters worse, 2 more young girls were getting down with the sickness. The girls claimed that they were being constantly tormented by evil spirits, but none of the other villagers ever witnessed the supposed spooky specters.
My sweet spazzing children, who did this to you?
Oh, hell no!
The girls named 3 women as witches: Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. The 3 were arrested and brought before a court to confess their crimes. Both Sarahs maintained their innocence, but Tituba caved. She confessed that she, along with Sarah 1 and Sarah 2, were wicked witches. Now, why in the frickin' heck would she do this, you might ask, scratching your itchy kneecaps? Because Sam Paris, her master, told her to. After being formally accused, Tituba was threatened to admit guilt or be smashed KO'd off screen with 0 stock. So which do you choose? Death at the hands of a single man, or by a jury of your peers? She chose the latter. But to throw a wrench into things, Tituba offered one more tidbit of information. There were more witches in the village. She just didn't know who. It could be anybody. Little Ann could have an evil plan, Big James could be casting flames, could it be Johnny with his golden fiddle, or Tom whose last name is Riddle? No one knew, and that was the problem. In one fell swoop, Tituba used history's greatest weapon: fear. And this wasn't just the run up my basement steps really fast so the demons don't get me type of fear. This was full-blown paranoia. And paranoia is an unlubed shaft just aching to cause some damage. Fear was at an all-time high, and trust was at an all-time low. With neighbors now turning on each other at the slightest inconvenience, this led to an overwhelming increase in accusations. So let's take a look at what it took to be accused of witchcraft. When paranoia goes full tilt, no one is safe. No man, woman, child, or even the village dog is free from suspicion. Between February of 1692 and May of 1693, it's believed that over 200 people in and around Salem were accused of witchcraft. The main character in a lot of these allegations was 12-year-old Ann Putnam Jr., who was personally responsible for putting over 60 innocent people on trial, some of whom were executed. But you didn't have to be caught red-handed smearing toad blood in a pentagram of candles to be considered an evil witch. Even simple, everyday tasks or coincidences were viewed as the devil's work to a bunch of cuckoo crazy people. If you found yourself strong enough to lift a heavy gun, it's cause the devil helped you, so now your days are done. If you can kill off crops with just a single glance, there's not much I can say. You don't stand a chance. If you brewed a bit of food that a rude dude chewed and subsequently spewed, your years of life accrued were about to conclude. Even petting a black cat without giving a dang, each one of these reasons was enough for you to hang. Now if you think that these were just dope rhymes with no reason, you're wrong. These were very real claims by the people of Salem. George Burroughs, one of Salem's ex-ministers, was a beefy boy. He lifted a really heavy musket when no one else could. Very impressive, but a bit too impressive. He was tried and executed. Martha Carrier faced the gallows after apparently hexing and killing a neighbor's entire livestock by just looking at them. It was pure mayhem. But not everyone agreed with what was going on. Luckily, some sound-minded villagers were not buying the bullshit, and many protested the imprisonment of obviously innocent people. Unluckily, those who called the trials a bunch of baloney were also thrown in the clink.
This is a bunch of baloney, this ain't witchcraft.
Ron? Oh no, looks like Ron's about to face a fate worse than death. The legal system. Well, time for a trial. Here we are, the trials of the century. Well, I guess multiple centuries since we're still talking about them. News of witchcraft allegations reached far and wide, prompting intervention from the Massachusetts government to sort it all out. Thus, the Salem witch trials commenced, fancy powdered wigs and all. You know, English things. Thankfully, since the trials happened only a few hundred years ago, there's still lots of surviving documents from Salem. Lots of them. So we can still get a pretty clear picture of how everything went down, or at least the version that was written. The court structure was very similar to what it is today. A judge, a jury, witnesses, testimonies, all that. But sprinkling in the complete paranoia that infested the village, things got interesting. The main accusers, the teenage girls Abigail Williams and Ann Putnam Jr., were present at pretty much every trial, much to the dismay of anyone whom they accused. If the defendants gave any attempt at denying the allegations, then the show would start. For poor Bridget Bishop, the girls claimed that they were being tortured by her evil spooky ghost. The girls would break out into fits and convincing seizures in court to make it seem like Bishop was cursing them from afar, like a witch would.
That's not how that works.
Bridget Bishop was convicted and hanged on June 10, 1692. Miss Martha Corey's testimony saw some real creativity. After publicly calling out the girls on their bullshit, Martha put herself in the crosshairs and was forced to defend her own innocence in court shortly after. While giving her testimony, the girls began to mimic her movements. When Martha raised her hand, so did the girls. If she turned her head, they followed. The girls cried out, claiming that they were being puppeted by the devil, and Martha was the one pulling the strings.
Art thou fucking serious?
72-year-old Martha Corey was convicted and hanged on September 22nd, 1692. Martha's husband, Giles, is probably the most famous death of these Salem witch trials. But the guy was a certified asshole, having turned on his own wife after she was accused, ultimately testifying against her and giving examples of her witchcraft, like reading too much or nagging him too often. He did later attempt to rescind these allegations, but it was a bit too late as she was already doomed to hang. Now, with Giles being on trial himself, he refused to plead guilty or not guilty. He knew that regardless of his plea, he would still end up being converted to a human wind chime. Boy, was he wrong. Instead, he was given more pressing matters. Literally. As punishment for his supposed crimes, Giles was forced to endure peine forte Dieu. That's French for strong and hard pain. What this meant was being laid on the ground under a board. Big, beautiful boulders were added to the board, distributing their weight across his body. Hundreds of pounds of stone pressed down on Corey across 3 whole days. His final words?
More weight.
He was 81, but now it looks like it's Ron's turn to defend himself. Let's see how that goes.
Ronald J. Fartknocker, thou hast been accused of witchcraft. What say you in your defense?
I didn't do shit. He's innocent!
Huh? What's all this?
Your Honor, I've known Ron for years. We've been through so much together.
That's right. We sort of survived a whole nuclear apocalypse together. He knows what a real witch is. She's been using powerful magic to torment him for years, sending him all across time. Greece, Japan, Egypt, you name it.
It's true. Wait a minute. I only ever told you about the nuclear apocalypse. How did you know about the others?
You just couldn't go along with it, could you? And here I thought you were a smart fella, not a fart smeller.
You're not Ron. You're...
No. Took you long enough.
That's a witch. Well, we've never really burned a witch before, but we'll take your word for it. Yeah. It'll work. The Silliest Deaths in History, Part 2. In a world of constant scientific revolution and innovation, it's required that any new theories be put to the test with reliable and repeatable proofs. Otherwise, you're about as useful as a flat earther. But sometimes that proof puts people in harm's way. Take, for instance, one Jesse William Lazier. This handsome block of cheddar was an American physician in the late 1800s, though he did live to see the new century, just not for very long. But we'll get to that in a bit. Growing from a well-to-do boy into a well-to-do man, Lazier had a passion for helping the ill and minimizing all of the icky sickies that had plagued humanity throughout history. So he took that passion and put it to good use, receiving his doctorate in medicine from Columbia University in 1892. Upgrading himself from graduate to practicing physician in 1895, Lazier focused his studies on two major diseases, the infectious malaria and the deadly yellow fever, both of which were stirring up all kinds of problems in the late 1800s, the worst of which being that people were dying. But exactly how these diseases were being spread so easily, particularly in the southern United States and in the Caribbean, remained a mystery, for a few more years at least. Well, that's not exactly true. You see, about 14 years earlier, Cuban public health professional disease researcher guy Carlos Finlay came up with a theory. He proposed that some diseases, particularly yellow fever, could be transmitted through the bite of a single infected mosquito. It's a rather simple theory. An itty-bitty mosquito bites an infected monkey, acquires the yellow fever, flies away, finds a healthy human, gives the suck and leaves behind yellow fever, and the cycle continues. Now, if you've ever spent more than 2 seconds in the American South, you know just how bad them little shits can get. So if there's a few infected people and a lot of mosquitoes, things are gonna spread faster than a bad joke at a dad convention. Oh, come on, I'm hungry. He said it. Finlay laid out his research and presented his nido-mosquito theory to the scientific community, opting for control over the mosquito population to minimize the spread. And they all laughed at him. All them stupid science bitches ridiculed and mocked Finlay's theory, brushing it off as complete nonsense. But now we fast forward more than a decade, and a very confident Lazier was willing to put that theory to the test. On himself.
Right here's an infected skater, and here's an uninfected me. So, if it bites me and I get infected, well, there you go.
And so, in September of 1900, Lazier was deliberately bitten by an infected mosquito. He contracted yellow fever and died several days later. But his sacrifice would not be in vain, as it confirmed Finlay's theory, subsequently revolutionizing the control of yellow fever, including controlling the mosquito population. The age of exploration saw a lot of exploring from many a capable sea captain. But amongst the Columbuses and Marco Polos of history, some have fallen through the cracks, their deeds and accomplishments forgotten to time, or just not important enough for people to care. Johnny Kendrick was one such captain. Ever since growing up aboard Papa Kendrick's whaling vessel in his teenage years, John had a love of the sea, which explains the vast success he found in his later years. This guy was more American than a strapped apple pie asking for a tip. A member of the American Sons of Liberty, Kendrick personally took part in the famous Boston Tea Party, hucking countless crates of precious British life fuel into the harbor. He also commanded a privateer ship during the American Revolution, attacking and capturing British warships with his crew of 104 men, even going as far as helping convince the French to join the fight. After helping America get its independence, Kendrick took to the seas once more, this time on a more exploratory venture. Teaming up with famous explorer ship-sailing captain fellow Robert Gray, whom you've probably never heard of, the two bros made history, leading the first US expedition to the Pacific Northwest, where they established a strong fur trade route. This was mainly trading goods like mirrors and knives to purchase sea otter pelts from local natives. Hey, gotta do what you gotta do, you know? Kendrick also made himself at home in Hawaii in the late 1700s. There, he built up a pretty lucrative sandalwood trade hub, harvesting the wood in Hawaii and shipping it off to China, who treasured the luscious lumber for its durability, medicinal and therapeutic properties, and of course, its smell.
Oh, that's good wood.
So Kendrick spent many a year just jamming as much of his wood as he could into China's supple trading ports, skipping back and forth across the Pacific Pond between mainland China and the Hawaiian Islands. But Hawaii, historically speaking, often had a bunch of fighting between chiefs of the different islands. Each chief, understandably enough, wanted to expand their respective territories and influence. Well, when returning to the islands in 1794, Kendrick found Hawaii to be in complete turmoil, with two chiefs duking it out to be the big chief in charge. One of the tribes was being supplied by Captain William Brown, a proper Brit who was willing to get some land for the British crown. Kendrick replied he too supplied a chief of great renown, and put to the test Kendrick did his best to smack the captain down. So in December of 1794, a battle commenced with Captain Brown supporting the chief of Oahu and Kendrick supporting the chief of Kauai. How cute. The tropical tussle ended with Kendrick's side being victorious, inspiring him to celebrate the only way a true American knows how, by firing off loud guns. As planned, Kendrick's ship had ignited a volley of cannon fire. Although his side had lost, Captain Brown, determined to uphold proper British etiquette, agreed to discharge a volley of his own cannons in Kendrick's honor.
Oh, this turtle soup is to die for. Well, that's what you get for slurping your soup.
Ugh, turns out in a complete honest mistake, Captain Brown forgot to unload shot from one of his cannons before firing it off. Some historical accounts claim that grape shot tore through Kendrick's cabin, creating complete chaos and quickly killing the competent captain as he crunched on a collation of consumables.
Oh, sorry about that. It's completely my fault.
Yep, that Jack Daniel, the two first-name having freak who founded the famous Jack Daniel's Tennessee Whiskey Company. You know, that succulent spirit that did, will, or is getting you through those tough college days or life in general. That's the one. Well, little Jackie Boy was born in Tennessee in the mid-1800s as the youngest of 10, mainly because his birth was the one that sent his beloved mother skyward. Very sad. Now, unfortunately, not much is known about Jack's early life because them town records don't went caught fire. Most of the insight that we do have into Jack's life actually comes from the Jack Daniel's Company historical records. Teeny Tiny Jack, the youthful entrepreneur that he was, yearned for work at the ripe old age of 8. The man to answer Jack's call was this guy, Dan Call, a preacher, a screecher, and one distilling creature. And of course, it would be here that Jack would find his calling. Something about Jack caught Dan's eye, and he saw real potential in the little tyke.
This boy's gonna make a fine whiskey one day, I tell you what.
And so, according to company history, an 8-year-old Jack began learning the art and science of distillation from one Nathan Green, a master distiller and slave under Dan Call. Fast forward several years and Dan hit a crossroad. Given an ultimatum by his wife, Dan had to choose between his relationship with his tasty spirits or the Holy Spirit. The Reverend chose his Lord and Savior, saving his soul and his liver in the process. In that choice, Dan had sold his prized distillery to none other than his favorite pupil, Jack Daniel, whose first act as new owner was to hire on his friend and mentor Nathan Green as the company's master distiller. He also employed Nathan's 2 adult sons and, later down the line, his grandsons. Now, the Jack Daniel's website really emphasizes that Jack never owned slaves. So if you disagree, don't look at me. I'm just a guy on the internet. A man of all business and no pleasure, Jack never married nor had any children of his own. He did, however, take his nephews under his wing to learn the business, eventually handing the distillery down to them in 1907 once his health bar had reached a solid yellow. But it would be a few years later in 1911 before Jack would kick the bucket, or in this case, something much heavier. According to legend, Jack Daniel, now in his 60s or so, had forgotten the combination to a personal safe housing a bunch of valuables like safes are typically designed to do. In his frustration, Jack tried to solve the problem in true US Southerner fashion, by putting a boot up its ass. But since a safe has buns of literal steel, Jack instead broke his toe, causing a severe blood infection. Jack Daniel reportedly died of blood poisoning on October 9th, 1911. But is this story true? I don't know. Here's a rather recent one for you. Back in 1993, when the world was witnessing the birth of the internet, Czechoslovakia was checking out, and President Clinton was gearing up to suck or be sucked at his job, Gary Hoy was about to meet his untimely death. An extremely successful business partner and corporate and securities law specialist for the Holden Day Wilson law firm in Toronto, Canada, Gary was living it up. But he would quickly learn that it's a long fall from the top. Gary had a reputation as a very personable guy, always loving to talk to people, share wisdom, and loved cracking a few jokes here and there. But on July 9th, 1993, one of Gary's jokes would fall flat. While attending a reception in the office on a Friday, Gary decided to give a tour of the office to a group of accounting and law students, which of course was a typical routine for Gary's charismatic character. But what happens next would be cemented in the minds of everyone around him. While on the tour of the 24th floor office, Gary decided to whip out his signature move. Boasting about the structural integrity of Canadian architecture and the seemingly unbreakable glass office windows, Gary charged full speed towards one of said windows, a party trick he apparently had performed successfully many times in the past. Typical Gary. But this time, he was also successful. Gary bounced right off of the glass without a hitch, to the applause and laughter of the students. Y'all wanna see me do it again?
Yeah!
No, not really. Gary was about to push his luck, and a little too hard on the window. Gary charged once more, hitting the glass at a sprint. Now, to his credit, the glass didn't break, but the entire window frame dislodged from its setting, causing Gary to plunge the full 24 stories to his death. The students and various colleagues stood paralyzed and horror-struck after witnessing Gary's fall, not to mention the witnesses on the ground where Hoy's body had landed. Following the incident, many of the firm's lawyers received professional counseling, but some chose to part ways with the company, eventually leading to its full closure in 1996. Talk about having a falling out. Each of us wants to accomplish our own big motivational concrete goals before crossing the eternal finish line. A loving family, traveling the world, subscribing to this channel, which you can do right now. But as the Rolling Stones once said, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, I forget the rest. Anyway, this is Frank Hayes, and he has his own goal, to win a race. A horse race. Problem is though, he is no professional jockey. A young Irish fella born in Ireland in 1901, Frank grew up as a stable boy and eventually an apprentice horse trainer under James Frayling, a wealthy gent who owned and bred professional racing horses. Paying close attention to Frank's rather small stature, Frayling gave Frank an opportunity to race as a jockey. And he lost. But apparently not too bad, because he was given a second chance in 1923. One small snag in this plan, however, was that Frank was a tad too heavy. Jockeys were required to weigh less than 130 pounds in order to qualify for racing. Ideally, the slimmer and sleeker your jockey is, the less of a burden he is for the horse, allowing for a higher potential speed. Less mass, go fast. And so, Frank was given a doozy of a task. Lose 12 pounds in a few days. And that's a big ask for someone already in a healthy weight range, but Frank was determined to strap in the saddle once more. Through what I can only imagine were extremely unhealthy choices, the frail Frank ended up making the cut, and was given the thumbs up to participate in the race, though he was nowhere near expected to win, with him and his horse only given 20-1 odds. On June 4th, 1923, Frank mounted his horse, named Sweet Kiss, and prepared to travel around the track. The racers were off, and Sweet Kiss quickly trailed behind the group. However, in the final stretch, Sweet Kiss apparently kicked in maximum overdrive and managed to close the gap, with Frank appearing locked in, closely hugging the horse's neck. In an extreme upset, Sweet Kiss actually won the race by a pretty respectable lead. But after dropping from a gallop to a canter to a walk, Frank was still closely gripping the steed. Frank Hayes was dead. During the race, Frank's heart gave out, presumably from the extreme and unhealthily fast weight drop sustained to get into the race in the first place. So yeah, Sweet Kiss carried a corpse across the finish line. Frank Hayes photo finished into the great beyond at the age of 22. Or 35, depending on whatever source you read. I know that's a big discrepancy, but welcome to history. Unfortunately, Sweet Kiss, now superstitiously dubbed Sweet Kiss of Death, never ran another race as jockeys refused to mount the mare, fearing a similar fate. So of course, it was the end of her show, and she got her final curtain call. Hold your breath, you're getting flushed back into the times of the Aztec Empire, a Mesoamerican civilization renowned for its vehemently violent and vicious nature. Or at least that's how history remembers it, and you're about to find yourself in the heart of it all. You've surfaced right outside of the capital city. Think you could survive? Well, they didn't, so maybe you could. Let's find out. Welcome to Tenochtitlan. Located in what is now Mexico City, Tenochtitlan was once a sprawling metropolis and one of the most populated cities in the whole world, home to over 200,000 people. Now, despite what you may think, the Aztec Empire is actually not that old. This is the year 1519, the historical height of the empire. That is, until... But anyway, you begin kicking your little arms and leggies to get to shore, assuming you can swim. After all, Tenochtitlan was built on a huge friggin' lake. Lake Texcoco to be precise. Why? Because religion makes you do illogical things. You see, way back around 1325, the Aztec people, who actually called themselves the Mexica, were tasked by their patron god Huitzilopochtli to find a promised land upon which to build a brand spanking new city. Huitzilopochtli apparently appeared in a priest's dream to deliver a divine prophecy with his soothing, ethereal voice. After strenuous searching in the Mexico Valley, all while annoying the heck out of other indigenous groups, the weary wanderer's wayfare finally came to an end, on an island in the middle of a huge freaking lake. Since this was not prime real estate in the slightest, many of the surrounding Mesoamerican civilizations who already disliked the aggressive, violent, and invasive Mexica allowed them to stake their claim without protest, as building buildings on a lake was a fool's errand. Nonetheless, Tenochtitlan was built from the soggy ground up. Over the span of the next 100 years, the city had flourished into a central hub of trading, education, and innovation. At least for its inhabitants. You see, decade after decade, the Mexica terrorized the surrounding lands, embarking on brutal and bloody conquests. These invasions established and expanded the Aztec Empire across roughly 80,000 square miles, beginning in 1428 all the way up to 1519. And here you are, so you better get to surviving. You can start by lifting your sopping self out of the saline water and flopping on a dry land. But wouldn't you know it, the jig's already up as you've been spotted by a local farmer. And unless you've got some heavy Mesoamerican blood pumping through your veins, they're gonna think you look weird, meaning that they'll be cautious. Sure, you could probably take out anyone in a 100-mile radius with a comedically timed sneeze, but you're not here to rewrite history. Just suffer through it. That being the case, you attempt to speak with the locals using your superb linguistics knowledge.
Por favor, manténgase alejado de las puertas.
No, you dingbat, they don't speak Spanish. Spanish aren't even here yet. Try something else. You ponder to yourself, scratching your long chin hair. Well, now what? You're exactly right. The Mexica had their own language called now what? See the little TL at the end there? It sounds like a just a little right in the kind of like in this word. You've probably been saying this as axolotl or ajolote from my Spanish speakers, but it actually comes from the Nahuatl language. So it would be correctly pronounced as axolotl. Be sure to drop that tidbit of knowledge into group chat so your friends can start a new one without you. Anyway, only about 1.5 million people today can even speak Nahuatl, and I'm willing to bet that you're not one of them. So if I were you, I'd about asho-lit my pants cause you're an outsider. And this is the part where you get taken captive. Or worse. If you are taken alive, you'd certainly wish that you weren't, but at least on the way to your doom, you'd be able to get a glimpse into the wonders that Tenochtitlan had to offer. Surprise, surprise, another civilization, another hierarchy system. The social structure of the Aztec Empire is often debated, but it can be boiled down to your vanilla upper, middle, and lower classes. The big guy at the top is called the Huey Tlatoani, or Supreme Emperor. The upper class, of course, is all your rich folk, your priests, your warriors, and your nobles. Next were the farmers, merchants, fishermen, and artisans making up the laboring middle class, and the poor unfortunate scum at the bottom were mostly slaves and prisoners of war. Upward movement through these classes was certainly possible, but certainly rare, so get to pulling on them bootstraps as soon as they're invented. But even if you were just a run-of-the-mill peasant, life wasn't terribly awful. Everyone knew that they needed to work to keep the wheels turning. Men tended to the farms, women tended to the homes, and the kids tended to their studies. The city itself was also super clean, relatively speaking. Accounts from the Spanish conquistadors noted the exceptional hygiene and cleanliness practiced by the Mexica. Big ol' Spanish ball of rage Hernan Cortez, who is currently on his way over from Spain to mop the floor with Aztec blood, noted the city's impressive public health innovations, including baths and toilets, and water fountains constantly supplied with fresh, clean water. There were even public servants scrubbing everything down on a daily basis. Waste was burned or recycled, and everyone's doo-doo feces fertilized the farms. That's good corn. Since personal hygiene was so ingrained in daily life, widespread disease was not an immediate threat. Yet, as long as there were no floods, droughts, volcanic eruptions, or earthquakes, life was pretty solid. The invention of sustainable, fertile floating farms called chinampas meant that food supply was fairly reliable. The local diet mainly consisted of vegetables or fruits. There's plenty of beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes, there's corn if you're torn, a fish if you wish, or dry out some turkey for a jerky dish. You've got deer, duck, lizards, and dogs, but no cows, chickens, goats, or hogs. Grasshoppers, worms, larvae, or ants, all packed with protein, so give them a chance. There's lots of food just begging to be cooked, and no, there's no Chipotle out here. Trust me, I've looked. Alright, enough rhyming. Now you have to keep in mind that this sweet lifestyle was only within the city limits of Tenochtitlan. The Aztec Empire itself was huge, and at its height in 1519, the entire empire ruled over 500 city-states and about 6 million people. While the Mexica were the head honchos around these parts, the empire as a whole was actually a triple alliance of 3 main cities: Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. But Tenochtitlan was the dominant power. Why? It's simple: fear. The Mexica were terrifyingly brutal and militaristic. Tenochtitlan was the promised land, remember, so they're gonna fight tooth and nail to defend what the gods have declared to be their home. So let's talk military. If you're going to be the main powerhouse of an empire and want to keep that empire from crumbling, you'd best believe that you need people who know how to fight. Surprisingly, Tenochtitlan itself had no standing professional military, so every male needed to be ready for a call to arms at a moment's notice in the event that a neighboring city starts getting all sassy. All male citizens in Tenochtitlan, regardless of class status, were required to go through rigorous warrior training at the age of 15. Intense daily exercise drills, marching formations, and weapon masteries were always on the menu. If you wanted to stab someone from a comfortable distance, you could always launch some arrows or huck a javelin. Close quarters combats called for clubs, spears, or this monstrosity, the maquawitl. This was a wooden paddle adorned with razor-sharp obsidian stones, capable of ripping flesh from bone in a single swing. Its clever design allowed for 2 modes of operation: cutting if they were bad, and spanking if they were naughty. Although certainly capable of inflicting a crap ton of pain, the purpose of these weapons was not to necessarily kill, but to incapacitate. You see, the Mexica actually preferred to capture enemy warriors alive, for reasons we'll cut into later. But perhaps one of the most effective weapons for the Mexica was intimidation. The Mexica wore extravagant, colorful clothing designed to represent ferocious animals such as eagles, jaguars, and serpents. Sometimes full-on animal skins were used too, so imagine getting charged up by a screaming, hulked-out maniac dressed head to toe in jaguar skin. You'd just about invert yourself into a scared little raisin. So while Tenochtitlan had no standing army, it could call upon tens of thousands of trained soldiers at the drop of a hat. As a consequence of being conquered, all city-states within the Aztec Empire were forced to pay tribute to the Mexica, allowing them to maintain the healthy and wealthy lifestyle that you see before you as you're paraded through the city as a filthy prisoner. Failure to pay tribute meant certain death, so these cities were quick to offer up the goods, but of course, they were not happy about it. But none of that concerns you. Instead, you've been sent to court for the crime of being a strange-looking weirdo. Now, this can go one of 2 ways. Captured prisoners in the Aztec Empire either faced slavery or were offered up as a heavy metal sacrifice to the gods, the latter of which being the highest honor. But let's start with... Believe it or not, being a slave under Aztec rule wasn't the worst because it wasn't really a system of oppression. Aztec slaves fell more into the category of indentured servitude instead of what we would think of as full-blown lifelong slavery. Slaves had basic rights, could marry freely, own land, and could even earn their freedom from their owners under the right conditions. I use the term owners here loosely, as they didn't outright own the person, just their labor. Owners were responsible for providing adequate food, shelter, and care for their slaves, and were even forbidden from mistreating them. And funny enough, if you could prove before a court that your owner was being a real asshat, you could most likely earn your freedom. If your owner was being extra dickish with verbal or physical lashings, they might even end up a slave themselves. Mexica criminal punishments went from 0 to 100 real quick. Victims of your petty crimes would have you provide financial compensation or you being enslaved to them to work off the debt. If you did something more serious, prepare to be publicly strangled or beaten to death with a big old stick or some rocks. If you were a real bad boy, you'd be promoted to sacrifice, all of which are pretty effective crime deterrents. But not all slaves were criminals or prisoners. In fact, some were even volunteers. Yeah, some citizens chose to become slaves in order to work off a debt. After that debt had been paid, the contract was complete and both parties went about their merry way, satisfied with the transaction. Remember that physical labor is backbreaking, but debt is crippling. As for work, slaves were mainly assigned to complete domestic chores by their owners.
Scrub the walls. Scrub the halls.
Scrub my balls? Now, of course, sometimes the involuntary slaves, such as yourself, weren't as willing to participate in paying off their debt to society. Since slave owners were not permitted to sell their slaves without said slave's consent, they were in a bind. So it was time to return the favor using a wooden collar. Not only was this collar one of shame, but also inconvenience. Besides looking completely humiliating, it also had a tactical purpose. You see, there was this strange rule that if a slave was able to flee, exit the city, and, I shit you not, step on a human turd, they could request freedom before a court.
Ugh, you didn't clean your foot, did you?
I did not. But since slave owners knew this silly rule, any slaves who were flight risks were given the collar, reducing their mobility in large crowds and doorways.
I just want to go inside.
You can also choose to no longer become a slave by marrying or having babies with your owner. But then you're back to square one. Any slaves who continued to be troublemakers for their owners were given 3 warnings before being eligible to be sold as a sacrifice to the temples, should their owner permit. And he just did. Oh, sucks to be you right now. You're about to become a... Welcome to the Hueyi Teocalli, also known as the Templo Mayor, the main temple in the heart of Tenochtitlan and the religious epicenter of many a sacrifice. It's also precisely where your heart is going to see sunlight for the first time in... ever. Religious societies can be pretty bloodthirsty. Just ask the Catholics. And the Mexica were no different. They firmly believed that their gods were fueled by blood offerings. For example, they believed that their patron sun god, Huitzilopochtli, required human blood to fight off the moon and stars at night to bring about a new day. So you can bet your beating chambers that blood flowed quite literally like there was no tomorrow. With over 200 different gods in the Aztec pantheon, it's quite a lot of mouths to feed. Harvested blood would be poured over statues of the gods while it was still fresh so they could get a little sip. Who's a hungry boy? You are. Warriors, of course, had the best tasting blood, right behind prisoners and children, so they were given priority over everyone else, making them a hot commodity. In order to keep supplies stocked, the Mexica would often host events called flower wars where at least 2 cities would send out troops to fight one another for the sake of capturing POWs for sacrifice. It's a real win-win. Now, when you think of Aztec human sacrifice, your mind probably goes straight to the iconic heart gripping and ripping, and you'd be right. Slapping a slave on a sacrificial slab and serving a swift stab to the sternum for the sudden surge of that sweet sanguine secretion. But when sacrifices were such a spectacle, variety was the spice of life. If you've seen one heart out of a human body, you've seen them all. Thanks, LiveLeak. Many methods of sacrifice were specific to each god. You want some rain? Drown some crying kiddos in a nearby lake for the rain god. Want to keep volcanic eruptions at bay? You better burn some women for the fire god. You want a bountiful harvest? We've got decapitation and flaying for the god of agriculture. Enthusiastic priests would even go as far as wearing the flayed skin just for that extra bit of pizzazz. The problem with these kinds of practices is that eventually it's going to rain again, volcanoes will have dormant periods, and some harvests will naturally provide higher yields. So if things turned out well, it's because the sacrifices worked. If they didn't, that's because you didn't sacrifice enough. You can see how this is a terrible feedback loop. Sometimes, though, sacrifices were performed on a large scale to slake a large thirst. For example, the grand opening ceremony of the Templo Mayor allegedly saw the blood of over 80,000 captives and slaves pour down the freshly carved stone, though historians do debate if this number is even accurate. What's not up for debate, though, is what's about to happen to you. Say adios to that heart of yours, buddy.
Stop!
Cortez! Oh, am I glad to see you. Necesito ir the fuck home. Comprende? Where the fuck were you? Deadliest chemical weapons. Humans have been wiping each other from existence since the beginning of time. Whether it's a simple squabble or an alls-out, balls-out war, nothing is ever really resolved until at least one side lies in ruin. Spartans? Destroyed. The Romans? Vandalized. The Korean War? Forget about it. While a classic sword to the chest or a freedom seat to the old gray matter is perfectly capable of getting your point across, sometimes nations invest in more creative solutions. And that's where full-on chemical warfare comes in. You see, a quick and easy demise is a courtesy. It's the slow and agonizing expirations that really send a message. So let's see just how far humanity is strayed from the light, shall we? As a warning, you'll be seeing some gruesome images of the effects of these very real and very deadly chemicals. So if you're one to be watching these videos with a big old plate of food, you're in for a bad time. Anyway, first up is mustard gas. A bit more tangy than your average condiment, mustard gas was a game changer in World War I, which was already a game changer itself in the world of warfare. First used by the Germans during the Third Battle of Ypres in Belgium in the summer of 1917, mustard gas is one of the most well-known chemical weapons used during the Great War. And here's a fact for you: mustard gas isn't a gas. It's not even a mustard. It's actually a liquid at room temperature, which actually made it more effective in warfare. The thick and oily liquid would stick to most surfaces for days on end. And to take advantage of this, mustard gas was packed into artillery shells, which bombarded the battlefield. The artillery explosions would turn the liquid into a fine mist, spraying all over the place. What's worse is that the lethal liquid would slowly vaporize in warmer temperatures, creating creeping death clouds which would engulf soldiers. This vicious vapor had a strong garlic or mustardy odor, which is how the chemical got its namesake. But no matter if it's a gas or a liquid, the horrible effects still remain the same. And I hope you're ready for some brief chemistry lessons here, because I'm going to be giving you a rundown of how these chemicals affect the human body. And since I'm a chemical engineer during my day job, you can, trust me, bro. Alright, so mustard gas is what's called a blistering agent. This means that its main form of attack is damaging human tissue. And this is done through the chemical's ability to really fudge up the DNA and proteins in the nuclei of your cells, particularly in the moisture areas of your body like your eyes, your skin, and your respiratory tract. So rest easy knowing that nowhere's really safe, especially if you sweat a lot, like say a soldier in the heat of battle carrying a crap ton of equipment. Any skin exposed to mustard gas will develop severe chemical burns, and thanks to all that DNA and protein destruction, will form very juicy but agonizingly painful yellow blisters, or as I like to call them, the Forbidden Capri Suns. Now, with how bad this stuff is on your skin, it's even worse when it gets in your slippery wet eyeballs. If mustard gas gets in your eyes, you're gonna be hit with severe and immediate irritation, burning, and in some cases, partial or complete blindness. But that's just the effects on the outside of the body. Breathing the stuff in results in immediate burning and pain in your throat and nasal passages.
Why is it spicy?
Over the course of a few days, this will evolve into inflammation of said airways, causing restricted breathing, congestion, and likely complete respiratory failure. Those who did survive mustard gas exposure often suffered long-term respiratory complications for years after the war. Despite causing these horrific side effects and being the most commonly used chemical in old WW1, the mortality rate of mustard gas is pretty low, only making up about 2 to 3% of all chemical warfare deaths during the Great War. There was a chemical that was much more deadly than mustard gas, and that chemical is way back in 1812, Cornish chemist and long neck haver John Davy decided to try to make some new chemical compounds, as chemists tend to do. Today's attempt was exposing a mixture of carbon monoxide and chlorine gas to sunlight. UV radiation from the sunlight actually kicked off a reaction, forming a new gaseous compound. Davy named this creation phosgene, which, when roughly translated from Greek, means born from light. This compound was pretty easy to produce and was deemed valuable in various chemical synthesis reactions. It's even still used today as an intermediate chemical by industries for making stuff like plastics, insulation, and even pharmaceuticals. The problem though is that it's extremely deadly if misused. Easy to make and deadly when misused. Sounds like the perfect candidate for a chemical weapon, said the Germans in a silly and aggressive accent. And that's just what they did. In December of 1915, during the First Battle of Ypres, poor Belgium really can't catch a break, Germans set up about 3,000 cylinders of compressed phosgene gas on the front line. It was then released in a light breeze, causing a deadly white cloud which devoured the opposing forces. Now, phosgene is classified as a choking agent, which, although very kinky, is lethal. When exposed to phosgene gas, you immediately experience violent coughing, difficulty breathing because, a choking agent, and nausea and vomiting. Not only will your skin develop painful chemical burns, but your respiratory tract as well. Just like with chlorine gas that I mentioned in a previous video, phosgene has a similar mechanism of action. It reacts with residual moisture inside and outside of your body through a process called hydrolysis, which forms hydrochloric acid and carbon dioxide. The newly formed acid eats away at any tissue it comes in contact with, which hurts. like a lot. The gas also directly damages your body's cells, causing your blood vessels to start leaking out fluids to neighboring organs, particularly your lungs, which is, as the French say, no bueno. The excess fluid in your lungs only makes your breathing worse and worse until eventually you're physically unable to breathe and you suffocate. Now, you might be familiar with the fact that a key tactic of World War I was trench warfare. Both sides of the war dug miles and miles of trenches as a way to protect themselves from machine gun fire. It's really hard to shoot at guys when they're in a little hidey hole. Well, this is where chemical weapons really shined. You see, chemicals like mustard gas and phosgene are much heavier than air, which means that the gases would creep over the land and pour into the trenches, flushing out any soldiers who happen to be in the wrong place, the wrong time. Warfare involving chemical weapons was horrifying. British officer Martin Greener recounted witnessing a cloud of poison gas approaching his position.
Just at dawn, they opened a very heavy fire, especially machine gun fire. And that's the idea, was that apparently to make you get down. And then the next thing we heard this sizzling, you know. I mean, you could hear this damn stuff coming out. And then saw this awful cloud coming over. Great yellow, greenish yellow cloud. Wasn't very high, about, I would say, it wasn't more than 20 feet up. Nobody knew what to think. But immediately it got there, we knew what to think. I mean, you knew what it was. Well, then of course you immediately began to choke. Then the word came, whatever you do, don't go down. You see, if you got to the bottom of the trench, you got the full blast of it, because it was heavy stuff, it went down.
Now, you have to remember that phosgene was first used in 1915. The first effective gas masks weren't developed or distributed for a few months, meaning that these first witnesses had little to no protection against this stuff. In the end, phosgene is estimated to be the cause of over 90,000, or about 85% of all known chemical weapon deaths during World War I. Although history likes to highlight the German Empire for their aggressive use of chemical weapons during the Great War, and rightfully so, it was actually France who first used tear gas in 1914. But compared to chemicals like phosgene, it's like hucking a paper ball at a cannon. Just prior to World War I's big spankin' sequel, Germany was experiencing a bit of a problem outside of planning world domination. Bugs. A bunch of weird little weevils were doing irreparable damage to German orchards, which were a key food source. You see, you have to be a little self-sustaining when you inevitably piss off the rest of the world. In response, German scientists were tasked with developing an effective insecticide to wither the weevils. In 1938, one Gerhard Schrader mixed phosphorus with cyanide, developing a toxic compound that was too deadly for agricultural use. If you can't kill bugs with it, maybe you can kill enemy troops with it. This compound was dubbed taboon, from the German word for taboo, because the compound was deemed too deadly for use. But that didn't dissuade Schrader, who rushed back to the lab to perform more experiments, and in doing so, he quickly developed a much more potent version of the already lethal compound. And this new poison was called sarin, a very volatile, odorless, colorless liquid. Why is it so deadly? Well, sarin is classified as a nerve agent, arguably the deadliest and most horrifying classification of any chemical weapon. And it works like this. Now really turn your brains on for this explanation. In your body is your nervous system. This is basically the entire body's communication network, controlling your movements, your thoughts, your emotions, your memory, muscle function, and passive functions like your heartbeat and your breathing. Well, sarin comes in and fucks all that up by messing with these guys. These are neurotransmitters, chemical compounds that are passed between neurons in your nervous system. Some neurotransmitters you may be familiar with are adrenaline, which gives you that fight or flight feeling, serotonin, the happiness molecule, and dopamine, which hits really hard when you're up about 450% on your spy calls, but you're too stupid to sell them even though they expire in 2 hours. Well, I would like you to meet acetylcholine. This neurotransmitter is what controls your muscle movement, your thought process, and your learning ability. When passed from your nervous system to your muscles are stimulated and move the way your brain tells them to. After your muscles are done doing what they're doing, the acetylcholine is then broken down by acetylcholinesterase, allowing the muscles to relax. So sarin over here comes in and breaks that communication line. Your muscles are bombarded with signals to move, but no signals to stop. As a result, victims who are exposed to sarin gas are no longer in control of their own bodies. They can't think, they can't breathe. The body continues to seize and painfully convulse. This complete loss of bodily function means death is quick, in as little as a single minute with direct inhalation. Compared to phosgene, sarin is calculated to be about 43 times more lethal when comparing lethal dosages. The sheer potential destruction of the chemical was enough to prevent Germany from ever using the gas during World War II. Some sources claim that the main mustache in charge was too scared to unleash it after his own personal experiences with mustard gas in World War I. But the guy authorized using gas chambers on innocent civilians, so I'm calling bullshit on that one. Regardless of the reason, sarin was never authorized for use in World War II. However, sarin, along with a beefed up version called cyclosarin, are known to have been used by Iraq in 1983 during the Iran-Iraq War, resulting in tens of thousands of deaths. An even deadlier version of the nerve agent called soman was also synthesized, but luckily it's never been used. Together, taboon, sarin, soman, and cyclosarin make up the G series of nerve agents. And you can pause here to read up on them. Alright, we need a mental health break here, so let's get some of that serotonin rebalanced. Oh, look at this little guy. He's living it up, he's doing his thing. He's got a piece of fluff, he's probably gonna nope, he ate it. Alright. Ugh, now look at this handsome little man. I think I know what he wants you to do. That's right. Don't disappoint him. Alright, back to the devastation and despair. Venomous Agent X, or VX for short, is a chemical compound discovered by the British in the 1950s, while, go figure, researching potential pesticides. Oh, how the turntables. Britain pulled the whole copy my homework but in your own words move by building off of the aforementioned Gerard Schrader's work. Once fully developed and refined, the compound was then produced for the sake of chemical warfare, should the world wars decide to become a trilogy. In its pure form, VX is a thick, oily, amber-colored liquid that is relatively non-volatile, meaning that it doesn't vaporize easily on its own at room temperature. These physical properties prevent the oil-like chemical from dissipating wherever it's released. It can remain on the ground and plants for days on end, creating poison pools across the landscape. The odorless and tasteless liquid is lethal in very small doses. Just a few milligrams on your skin will be enough to send you vertically packing. The mechanism of action is identical to sarin, causing a complete loss of bodily function and death by asphyxiation. However, VX is considered to be much more potent. In 1993, the United Nations banned, along with several other chemical weapons, the production and stockpiling of VX in any amount that exceeds 100 grams, or about a quarter pound minus the cheese. VX had also been used alongside sarin during the Iran-Iraq War in 1983. As well as a few assassinations, the most high profile of which being the brother of North Korea leader guy Kim Jong-un in 2017, where two women rubbed a cloth soaked with the nerve agent in the poor guy's face at an airport. He received his one-way boarding pass to the Northeast Korea in the sky in just 15 minutes. But that's not the end of nerve agents just yet. No, now it's the Soviet Union's turn to dabble in chemical weapons in the 1970s. Many sneaky Soviet scientists were tasked with developing new nerve agents to bypass the UN's banned chemical weapons list. After over 2 decades of research, the Novichok series of nerve agents were developed. These 8 compounds are believed to be the most toxic things ever developed by mankind, besides political subreddits. Now, the Novichok agents are functionally equivalent to other nerve agents, but again, are much more potent than the last. Although weapons were created to release these agents, they were never deployed on the battlefield. Instead, these compounds are mainly used in silencing enemies of the state, with one of the most recent cases being in 2018. If you've actually paid attention in any of your world history classes, then you know what this stuff is. Zyklon B. Derived from the German word for cyclone, this pesticide turned humanicide was developed by, you guessed it, those gosh dang Germans back in the 1920s. Originally for much more innocent uses like getting rid of lice on clothes, to fumigating warehouses, ships, and even trains used to transport cattle. Just cattle. Zyklon B's main ingredient is hydrogen cyanide, a toxic systemic poison. The compound takes the form of small pellets which, when exposed to air, evaporate into a gas. Now before some nerds out there correct me, the phase change from a solid directly to a vapor is actually called sublimation. This is me saying, I know. What matters is the impact of the gas once inhaled. The biology of it all is very complex, but basically when a victim inhales hydrogen cyanide, it's absorbed into the blood through the lungs, where it breaks down into regular cyanide. This then poisons the body's cells, particularly the mitochondria. You know, the powerhouse of the cell. Aren't you glad you learned that one? Well, inside the mitochondria, cyanide stops the cellular respiration process. This means that your body can no longer produce the energy required for your cells to do their jobs. And just like in this American economy, without jobs, the cells die very quickly. As a result, the entire body shuts down, with death occurring within minutes of exposure. Of course, you may know that Zyklon B was Adolf Hitler's poison of choice to systematically eliminate millions in a bout of weaponized ostracism. You know, during that big historical event in World War II that YouTube doesn't like people talking about. Isn't it great living in a time where we have to censor ourselves when discussing horrific historical events? Anyway, next chapter. During the Vietnam War from the mid-50s to the mid-70s, the US was kind of getting their asses handed to them. One of the main problems for US troops was North Vietnam's territorial advantage. Thick foliage and treacherous jungles provided the northern military with tactical cover and vantage points. So how do you fight back against a hidden opponent? You take away their hiding spots. And that's exactly what the US tried to do when they developed the rainbow agents, toxic herbicides developed specifically for converting a lush jungle biome into a complete wasteland. Luckily, a bunch of US chemical companies already produced herbicides for use in agriculture to kill off invasive plants that threaten crop yields. The most notable companies were the Dow Chemical Company and the Monsanto Company. These companies were then tasked with upping production for the war effort. In all, 6 herbicides were developed: Agents Green, Pink, Purple, Blue, White, and Orange, all named after the color-coded barrels that they were shipped in. Agent Orange was released into the environment by any means necessary. Helicopters, planes, boats, trucks, backpacks, whatever could be used to spray liquid everywhere. It's estimated that over 11 million gallons of Agent Orange showered over South Vietnam, as well as the neutral countries of Laos and Cambodia. The US government actually sprayed about 20 times more than what the chemical manufacturers deemed necessary to get the job done.
You what?
Tens of thousands of square miles of rainforest and jungle were devastated in the 60s and 70s. Full ecosystems were flat out destroyed. Surviving wildlife were forced to relocate, and while not directly intended, hundreds of thousands of people were caught in the crossfire, soldiers and civilians alike. Immediate exposure symptoms included skin irritation and swelling, as well as difficulty breathing. Overall, the short-term effects were pretty mild and non-threatening. However, it was the long-term effects that packed the punch. In all, 14 diseases are linked with Agent Orange exposure, including various cancers, Parkinson's disease, and severe birth defects thanks to the chemical mixture's genetically damaging mechanism of action. Despite not being solely intended as a chemical weapon against humans, it is estimated that over 300,000 US troops and over 400,000 Vietnamese, Laotian, and Cambodian people have died as a result of Agent Orange's long-term side effects, making the compound one of the deadliest in history.
Where's the lamb sauce?
Those idiots always forget the lamb sauce. Well, that sucks. Looks like you are in for another round of survival, but hey, at least the witch wasn't part of this one, right? Right, so let's see what you're made of. I'm gonna go narrate from a safe distance. Good luck. Alright, so first you're gonna need to assess any immediate damage and take stock of what you or you could panic and make hasty decisions instead. See what happens when you panic? Now, take a deep irradiated breath and just think for a second here. Judging by the fact that the nuclear plant is like right there, it's safe to say that you're well within the danger zone. Hope Hope that cheaper house price is worth it. Your immediate and best move is to go back into your house and shelter in place since you know that there's at least some food and water there. Make sure all of your windows and doors are sealed shut to keep out any unwanted radiation and/or people. Desperate times create desperate people. Also, try to stay in the center of your house or bunker down in the basement. You might also want to take the time to contact those you care about. Oh wait, in this hypothetical scenario, you're a complete loner who doesn't have much in the ways of loved ones. Except your buddy Ron, but you never invite him over. Oh well, the less people you have in your life, the less you have to be concerned about in an emergency situation. Who needs loved ones? Not you. Hypothetically, of course. Also, your phone has no signal thanks to extreme network congestion and plot convenient factors. They never work when you need them to. Speaking of people, be glad you're not out in that traffic jam. They're about to learn a thing or two about nuclear fallout. See, when a nuclear source detonates, that explosion will vaporize and launch a bunch of stinky radioactive material out over yonder. Fallout can come in many flavors, ranging from small sand-like particles to large heavy debris and even a mediocre franchise. Either way, this stuff is deadly. Any form of contact will likely result in radiation burns. What's radiation? It's just traveling energy. Heat from the sun? Radiation. Wi-Fi? Radiation. Your buddy Raymond from Japan? Radiation. These examples, though, are considered low-energy radiation, also known as non-ionizing radiation, meaning that they aren't strong enough to cause any physical harm. Except Ray. Nuclear radiation, however, can, and it will. You can think of high-energy or ionizing radiation as a bunch of itty-bitty fists just penetrating your soft, vulnerable body and beating the ever-loving crap out of your internal molecules, particularly your DNA. Now here's a lesson for you. Your DNA is your genetic information, passed on to you through many generations. Your mom, your dad, your grandparents too. Some from Emo Mary and the balls of Grandpa Lou. Looking like a ladder with a big old twist, it's pretty complicated, but you'll get the gist. All these little rungs determine all your bits. Brown eyes, quick wits, thick thighs or nice tits. Are you breathing without heaving, maybe blinking without thinking? Then thank your DNA for all the heavy lifting. Adenine for A, cytosine for C. Guanine is your G and thymine is your T. With the C to the G and the T to the A is what keeps you alive at the end of the day. Now, if this rhyme made your dopamine spike, then hit that subscribe or at least give a like. Thank you. Anyway, if you leave yourself unprotected, then all of that high energy radiation comes in and just gives your DNA a what for, severing them critical bonds and altering your genetic code, which will more or less lead to developmental issues and cancer down the road. One positive about nuclear fallout is that its radioactivity decays very fast. According to the US Department of Health and Human Services, within the first 7 hours, the fallout has already lost 90% of its dose rate of radiation. If you wait a full 48 hours, that increases to 99%. Sure, I wouldn't advise making dust angels in it, but it's better than what happened to those traffic jam people. Poor souls. The point is, patience and planning will get you through this. Ooh, looks like you got company.
Yo, dude, it's Rod. Open up.
The mysterious voice at the door, as he just identified himself, is Ron. He's your best and only friend going on 4 years now ever since you both wore that same shirt at that one bar at that one time.
Bro.
Yeah, guy friendships are that simple. Now Ron, he's always had this weird obsession with end of the world scenarios like this, so I'm sure he will use this situation as a big ol' I told you so.
I told you so.
See?
Of course I had to invite myself over, but dude, we gotta get a move on.
It's been a few weeks with Ron and things are going pretty well. Luckily, with like 3/4 of the population dying in gridlock, resources are still pretty plentiful. You've both managed to hunker down in a grocery store, which is conveniently constructed next to a home improvement facility. That's pretty neat. But let's face it, humans are opportunists. So if there's chaos and confusion, people will take advantage. Sure, some looting and stuff happened, but oddly enough, the majority of things taken were TVs and shoes. Hey. That's lucky for you since those things are, as far as I know, inedible. Sure, you'd figure that the government might have helped out by now, but when the emergency services budget has been diverted to researching the long-term effects of Asmongold political commentary, there's not much for wiggle room.
Yeah, this is gonna keep getting worse.
As for food, you want to prioritize anything that is sealed, especially with high water content, as they are the least likely to be affected by radiation since radiation can't swim. Things like canned meats, canned vegetables, and oh no way, they even have... Since this grocery store has backup generators, refrigerated and frozen foods are still on the menu. If you can figure out a way to safely cook them, of course.
Rats.
Uh-oh, looks like the store manager isn't too happy about you fingering his foods.
You'll have to pay for that, you know.
Time for a choice. What's a plumber's favorite drug? Huh? Crack.
You said you weren't gonna.
I lied. Ron, do you think we're gonna make it out of here?
Of course, dude. Why do you ask?
I just think we should be making progress away from here, away from all of this chaos and this radiation.
I mean, sure, but it's all radioactive out there.
Actually, all the radiation is being blown northwest of here. As long as you keep to the southeast for a few hundred miles, you should be good. So why haven't you left? Do you really care? No. Well, you probably want radiation suits like these ones just in case though, but these are for me and my son here. Can we have those? Hell no. Please? Okay, nice work. You've managed to figure out a way to safety, but you can't go unprepared. You're gonna need to find some equipment for the journey ahead. You shimmy your way over to the hardware place next door to look for supplies. With some luck, you're able to find some cloth, 3 logs, and a rope. With some elbow grease and a bit of know-how, you're able to craft these into something useful. That should work. You also grab a sweet axe as a precaution, placing all of the items in your back pocket to save precious time on animation. You ready to go, Ron? Let's do it. Oh, that needs some WD-40.
Yep.
You traverse through the remnants of the town and make your way towards the southeast. On your way, you pass by dozens of poor unfortunate souls who have succumbed to the effects of radiation poisoning. This stuff is not fun in the slightest. If your unprotected body gets absolutely assaulted by ionizing radiation, you're in for a world of hurt. Literally. I'm sure you're familiar with the famous Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986. The firefighters and operators during that event learned very quickly that death can be an invisible beast. After generous exposure to radiation emanating from the nuclear plant's reactor core, these men endured unfathomable pain and suffering for weeks. Immediate symptoms included radiation burns, intense nausea and vomiting, headaches, and diarrhea. Those that could be were rushed to the Pripyat hospital, where they had to be stripped of their contaminated clothes that continued to bombard their bodies with radiation, even while being miles from the original source. Those clothes were abandoned in the hospital's basement and are still down there emitting levels of radiation to this day, albeit not nearly as dangerous. Over the following weeks, these men's bodies severely deteriorated, forming painful burns and bleeding blisters with extreme hair loss and a constant state of confusion and dizziness. In the end, 28 firefighters who responded to the Chernobyl disaster died of acute radiation syndrome. But there's nothing cute about being turned into a human hemorrhoid. Now luckily, you're past the point of this being a problem for you. It's probably best if you trail off from the beaten path. After all, you never know if any of the other survivors you encounter will be friend or foe. You trek through the woods for a few days, living off of various non-perishables and bottled water from your convenient off-screen inventory. But supplies are starting to run a bit low and you think you might need to start foraging. But hold on, remember that nuclear contamination can spread far beyond the original site, even if it isn't directly downwind. So animals, plants, and water sources can still be contaminated. So unless you carry a reverse osmosis filtration plant between your cheeks, you're SOL. Looks like you need to search elsewhere for food and water. But it also looks like Ron is about to be in danger.
Oh, look at this little fella. You gotta come over here and take a look at this little powder puff. He's so dang cute.
Ron?
What? Oh, shit.
There! A cave! Bears hate caves!
Good enough for me. You might want to hurry up a bit.
We made it. You okay, Ron? Ron? Are you okay? You take the time to mourn the loss of your fallen friend, but the solemn silence is broken by a noise deeper in the cave. You even notice some light and are determined to investigate. Now, under normal circumstances, you really shouldn't be wandering willy-nilly into a cave like this. It's a surefire way to end up trapped or wedged in some narrow cave system dubbed Satan's Prolapse. But there is an angry bear outside that just murdered your friend, so this might be a better alternative. Let's see what lies ahead. Hello? 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 I hate cultists.
Well, that was certainly a choice. Looks like you're the new owner of a weird little worshipping cave. Probably some sweet loot here. You scavenge and swipe what you can. Some food, materials, but something else catches your eye. Well, that's definitely magical, but certainly evil. And there's an inscription underneath. Survival you have learned, so now you must return. Just flip me thrice, but some advice, that witch will need to burn. Are you really gonna trust some evil artifact you just found in a cultist's cave? Why not? Alley-oop. I'm back. Hey, Cityville nuclear power plant? We have a witch problem. No, this isn't a prank. Hey Ron, do you want to come over?
Where's the lamb sauce?
Evil queens and their evil schemes. Well, that's a stretch. When you come across big bad figures in history, you might wonder if their infamous traits get passed on to their children. In the case of Mary Tudor, daughter of certified neckbeard King Henry VIII, the apple didn't fall far from the royal tree, but not for the reasons you may expect. Little Mary was born in 1516 and was actually the 5th child of King Henry and Queen Catherine of Aragon, but the only one to survive past infancy because babies are fragile. Henry loved his daughter and provided her with a healthy education in music and language with a strong Catholic upbringing. But the problem with his daughter was that she wasn't a son, so she wasn't seen as a suitable heir to the throne of England. Mary, what do you want to be when you grow up? Queen of all England. No. With that being the case, Henry VIII sought to sow more seeds and give the law of large numbers another go. After all, he needs a baby boy to slam on the throne and bear the crown. To do that, he sought to divorce the now barren Catherine for a wife that was a bit more fruitful. Henry then lumbered down to present his case to the manager of the Catholic Church, the Pope. "No way, Henry, them's against the rules," said the Pope. But Henry argued, I'm the king? I'm the one with
Absolute power.
and annulled the marriage anyway. That little act of defiance was a precursor to the English Reformation, which toned down the Pope's authority within the Catholic Church. Instead, Henry made his own church, the Church of England, and put himself in charge, and he was all, nice. He then got himself a brand new womb on legs, Anne Boleyn, who blessed them with a daughter in 1533. Great, another one. When he divorced Catherine and started slop-flopping with Anne, Henry illegitimized Mary's claim to the throne and stripped her of her royal titles. From that day forward, a seed of resentment and hatred within Mary took root that would continue to grow for years to come. Eventually, Henry got his heir. Little Edward VI spawned into the world in October 1537, but had connection issues and lagged out in 1553 at the age of 15, a short 6 years after Daddy Henry himself expired. Blech. With no other heirs, there was really only one person who could take the throne, Lady Jane Grey, King Henry VIII's great niece. But Mary was royally ticked off, being all... After gathering a gaggle of supporters, Mary had Lady Jane's 16-year-old dome lobbed off and took the throne. Now in power, Mary's main goal was to re-establish Catholicism as the one true religion within England, since evil Papa Henry played a part in the Protestant Reformation, which diminished Catholic support. To help with that, she went and married Catholic fanatic Philip II of Spain, which was in the middle of the highly unexpected Spanish Inquisition at the time. She also reinstated heresy laws and began her purge of heretics within England. Basically, if you weren't or didn't want to be Catholic, then you could just get out. But Protestants protested her authority. No, it's just one word. Oh, that makes much more sense. With some light pushing and heavy shoving from her new husband, Mary decided to fight fire, with actual fire, by burning people. From 1555 to 1558, Mary had almost 300 people burned at the stake for heresy, truly believing that it was the only way to cleanse England of blasphemous false religions. To her, it was a God-given mission to rid the world of these heretics, and the people of England would realize in time that it was for the greater good. But the only thing that they realized was that she was a few sandwiches short of a picnic. Her scorched earth approach tanked her political approval rating and tarnished the image of Catholicism. She ultimately got down with the sickness in 1558 at the age of 42. Because of her violent antics, Queen Mary I of England is forever remembered in history as Bloody Mary, which is also a pretty disgusting drink. If you want your shot at claiming a throne, you're gonna have to start cracking skulls, which is what Empress Wu Zetian would eventually do. Empress Wu officially ruled over the Second Zhou dynasty in China from the year 690 to 705. She was known for having extremely high intelligence, strong political competence, and superior ambition. But history overshadowed her strengths with a reputation as one of the cruelest rulers in China's history. Though of course it has to be said that many of the individuals who wrote about her actions weren't exactly huge fans of being politically cucked by a woman. So perhaps some of the stories of her evil deeds are a bit exaggerated? Maybe. But maybe not. Born into a wealthy family with a loving and supportive father, Wu was granted a first-rate education in writing, politics, and music, a privilege not afforded to most women. In her spare time, she favored heavy reading in politics and boring government stuff, which made her more than capable of holding a position in political power, if she was a guy. But opportunity would soon come a-knockin'. At just 14 years old, tales of Wu's intelligence and beauty made it to the imperial palace, and she was formally summoned to become an imperial concubine under Emperor Taizong. This basically meant that she was now one of the emperor's glorified slam pieces, but Wu knew that she was destined for greater things. Every journey starts with the first step, after all. The main duty of a concubine was to convert these into these. But Wu never did that. Instead, she would often find ways to openly discuss political affairs with the emperor, something that was certainly frowned upon for someone in her position. The emperor eventually went forever sleepy-bye, and his heir, Gaozhong, took the throne. As a side note, when an emperor died, any assigned concubines that produced no children were sent to become Buddhist priestesses, which is what happened to Wu. But Gaozhong summoned Wu back to the palace. This led to the belief that the two had a history of doing a little woohoo. Who? Wu. Not you. Now in the proud position of top-ranking concubine, it was time to climb higher. Her target? The Empress herself. Gaozhong's primary wife, Empress Wang, was a bit barren in the bush, and thus wasn't so good at the baby making. So Wu showed her a neat party trick and shot out 4 boys and a daughter, an act that gained strong favor with the emperor. Even Empress Wang herself adored the children, especially the newborn daughter. Oh, how cute is she? I know, right?
You killed my daughter.
Yeah, Wu allegedly demolished her own infant daughter and blamed it on the Empress, even going an extra step and accusing the Empress and her mother of evil spooky witchcraft. And you know what? Gaozhong believed it. So Wang is demoted, and Wu is made Empress, and immediately has Wang whacked for good measure. But this wasn't a normal execution. According to some sources, Wu had the ex-empress's limbs cut off and her remains placed in a vat of wine.
And here, sir, is our house specialty.
I can already tell that this is gonna have a nice body to it. Gaozhong continued his rule for several years, but historians believe that Wu was pulling most of the strings, strengthening ally relations and executing or banishing political rivals behind the scenes. While Gaozhong then kicked the bucket in 683. With plenty of eligible sons, surely a new emperor was around the corner. Except, no. Apparently, there are allegations that Wu had banished many of the princes and even had the crown prince poisoned. While she did have 2 sons serve as emperors, she remained the puppet master, just like with Gaozhong. But in 690, sole power was given to Wu, and she was now the Empress Regent, holy and divine ruler of all China. Now in power, the only way anyone could take it from her would be from her cold, dead, wrinkly hands. Across the years, many rebels and rivals took that challenge, lashing out in attempts to usurp her throne, but none were successful. She even exiled one of her own sons after his wife spoke out against her. Any and all rebels were quickly eradicated. Despite her aggressive and manipulative climb to power, Empress Wu actually ruled very peacefully. She strengthened many relationships with allies, progressed gender equality, and eased taxes on peasants, allowing agriculture to flourish. Because of her constant vigilance against enemies, China experienced very few military engagements during her reign. So yeah, since she had a pretty good run as Empress, it wouldn't surprise me if tales of her wrongdoings weren't completely fabricated or at least overly exaggerated as a way to sway public opinion. The Empress fell ill in 705 and was forced to give up the throne to her son. She died shortly after. When discussing violent history, Madagascar may not be the first thing that comes to mind. But this forgotten stepchild of an African island known for vanilla and bad movies was once home to the Kingdom of Imarina and the Marina people. In the 1800s, the throne was occupied by Queen Ranavalona I, sometimes referred to as Ranavalona the Cruel. A name like that is often earned, like Barry the Bashful or Dave the Dickless. With her reign saturated in the blood of her own subjects as well as foreigners, it's easy to understand why she earned her reputation as a merciless and brutal monarch. It all started way back with humble beginnings. Little Rana was actually born a poor peasant girl with an equally poor peasant family. As such, she had a bleak future just chock full of peasant things ahead of her. God, they were poor. But fate had other plans in store. Rana's destitute dad had casually stumbled upon a plot to assassinate the king at the time, and quickly warned him of the impending doom. After narrowly avoiding a classic comedy death, the grateful king demonstrated his gratitude by adopting Rana into the royal family and marrying her off to the prince. Now, Rana is royalty. Sweet deal, cause it could have just as easily been like, "Your Majesty, I just found these plans to have you assassinated."
Good work, little peasant man. I would pat you on the head, but you're just too dirty. Also, I have to kill you as a safety precaution.
Oh.
You understand. Nice guy.
Oh yeah, real nice guy. Fast forward a bit, the king eventually dies, Rana's hubby prince becomes king, he dies, and then in 1828, the now 50-year-old Rana seizes the palace for herself, murdering any and all royal family members so that no one can even think of contesting her newfound power. Sure, she's powerful and all, but can she make your subscribe button glow? I didn't think so. You should click it. One of her first orders as Supreme Mega Ultra Ruler was to establish Madagascar as a self-sufficient nation. In doing so, she told everyone else to go kick rocks, pound sand, and touch grass, because Madagascar is a strong independent nation who don't need no foreigners. Oh yeah, she kicked out all of the foreigners too. Go on. To fully eliminate all outside influence, she had any colonials stripped of their titles, completely nullified all treaties with smelly Europeans, mainly the French, and straight up banned Christianity. Sorry, Jesus. Keep hanging in there, buddy. Queen Ranavalona sent Madagascar back into the Dark Ages, and good old tradition was back on the menu. Even the justice system was completely uprooted. Forget your run-of-the-mill witnesses, evidence, and testimony. That's boring. Instead, we have this. The trial by ordeal. Simply chug a frothy cup of poison seasoned with goopy chicken skin. If you throw up, you're innocent. So the French were all sacre bleu about Madagascar's isolationism, cause they kinda wanted to grab a piece of that landmass. So they tried to do just that, but the queen was all, no, don't touch, and kept fighting off the invaders. In 1835, the French made a really big push to take the island, but they were swiftly defeated and had to escargot the heck back to Europe. But to really drive home the idea that Madagascar was off limits, Queen Rana had the heads of French soldiers placed on pikes and littered around the beaches. This caused any would-be invaders to think twice lest they be converted into a pretty cool Halloween decoration. With outside influence now null and void, it was time to focus inward. The people of Madagascar were taught the importance of self-sufficiency. As such, they would only produce what they needed to survive and prosper. So they made guns, and bullets, and alcohol. Hell yeah. Infrastructure and factories were built using mandatory labor. This was a kind of tax that citizens paid through sweat and tears. After all, them things ain't gonna build themselves. As for the Christians on the island, they were executed, either by being hucked off ledges, burned, or by using a colorful method of progressive amputation. Not a good time or place to be a Christian. Many citizens were outraged at what the kingdom was turning into and attempted to remove Rana from the throne. Keyword being attempted. With all of this violence and lower quality of life, not to mention various diseases, the population took a nosedive. Some sources claim that between 1833 and 1839, Madagascar's population of 5 million fellas was cut down to just 2.5 million. Not a good stat to tack onto your legacy. Rana reigned for 33 years before honking her last shoe in her bed in 1861. To her credit, she did keep colonial rule at bay while building up her own kingdom. She just, killed half of her country. Yes, I know Elizabeth Bathory wasn't a queen. She was a countess, but her story more than makes up for it. So, as I said, Elizabeth Bathory was a countess in 16th century Hungary with quite the dark side to her. She is arguably one of the most prolific serial killers in all of known history. Horrific to many, wifey material to some. Now, I'll acknowledge that some scholars believe these accusations to be completely fabricated and merely a smear campaign against her image, but we like to have fun here. So, little Lizzie was born into a rich and powerful family and forcibly engaged this geometric anomaly of a human, Count Ferenc Nadasdy, at just 11 years old. Don't worry, he was 16. This move was one concocted by both of their families as a way to combine each other's wealth and influence, and it worked. However, being all rich and powerful meant that you didn't really have much to do but sit around and be rich, so sometimes you gotta numb that perpetual emptiness with a little bit of purpose. When we fast forward to 1602, rumors began to circulate amongst the Hungarian population about the Countess's brand new hobby, murdering children. You see, Elizabeth Bathory was accused of torturing and killing hundreds of innocent, wide-eyed, rosy-cheeked girls with the help of her 4 servants. But why, you ask? Some believe that she harvested the young girl's blood for eternal youth, bathing in it as a nightly ritual, like some kind of Hollywood elite. But there is zero solid evidence even remotely hinting that she ever really did this. In fact, those rumors didn't circulate until 100 years after her death. Others believe that she just liked doing it for the thrill of it, which is much more plausible. Messed up, but plausible. Her early victims were mainly adolescent peasant girls. With the help of her 4 servants, whose names look like they belong in an NHL hockey team, Elizabeth carried out the gruesome murders. I mean, these were nasty, so here's your warning. Victims were commonly beaten to death to the point of their bodies bursting open, with one particular victim struck over 500 times. Others were reportedly pricked with needles and stabbed all over their bodies. In the winter, some girls were dunked in a nearby creek on cold, chilly nights and left to freeze. In the summer, others were covered in honey and left to be a feast for the flies. Elizabeth herself enjoyed putting red-hot metal rods on or in her victims. In 1609, Elizabeth opened up a boarding school for young girls of noble birth. Dozens of girls entered this school, but none were ever seen again. And this was the tipping point. You see, no one really bats an eye when peasants disappear, but when it's rich girls? No. That changes things. And now more people got involved, all the way up to the Hungarian king, who ordered a formal investigation. After a year of gathering hundreds of potential witnesses who claimed to have seen Elizabeth and the gang disposing of corpses, they were all properly arrested in 1610. Afterward, the accomplices testified separately, providing known body counts and horrific details of the deeds, even cross-confirming each other's stories. Because of this, historians believe that their testimonies are true recollections of the horror. Elizabeth is often pinned with the body count of over 600 victims. But that's just crazy. In reality, historians believe the real number to be much lower, probably only around 300. Oh, that's still a lot. All 5 were tried and convicted, with only 3 of the 4 accomplices being executed. Elizabeth avoided the death penalty, but was ultimately imprisoned within her very own dungeon, with limited contact to others for the rest of her life. A life that lasted only 4 more years. History's good as boys. Being a good boy is not limited to any one animal. It could be a dog, a cat, a bat, a rat, or even your 4-year-old little cousin when he isn't kicking your shins. That being said, our first good boy is Gustav. Ever since he was just a little embryo wriggling in his egg, he wanted to serve his country. So when it was time to leave the nest, he decided to enlist in the military, despite parental pressures not to. After some intense training with his new human counterpart, Frederick Jackson of Cosham, Gustav earned his wings and was officially made a service pigeon for the British Royal Air Force during World War II. So which one is yours? Oh, that handsome little pigeon right in the middle there. Ugh, pervert. Early in his career, Gustav was part of the Belgian resistance, carrying messages out of German-occupied Belgium. But since the Germans had previously occupied Belgium for 4 years during World War I, the Belgians knew the drill. Oh honey, it looks like the Germans are back. I'll go get the mallet. After a long, successful run of sending messages in and out of Belgium, Gustav would be assigned his most important role yet. On June 6, 1944, Gustav was aboard an Allied landing ship headed towards the beaches of Normandy. If you know your history, you're familiar with that date being D-Day, when Allied forces decided to penetrate a very German France. Unfortunately, our feathered friend was not well versed in combat, so he was tasked with delivering critical news back to the UK about the mission. Gustav held the message in his little footsie and took wing, 150 whole miles against a 30-mile-an-hour headwind. Bro was flapping. After just over 5 hours of continuous flight, the message was received, being the first official update on D-Day's mission status since the fleet went radio silent to avoid detection. For his service, Gustav was given a Dickin. Yeah, a Dickin Medal for his bravery, which is the animal equivalent of the British Victoria Cross or the US Medal of Honor. Gustav eventually retired from service and lived out the rest of his days with his best friend and former trainer, Fred Jackson. He went to the Great Nest in the Sky as a war hero and an official good boy. By the end of the war, a total of 32 carrier pigeons were awarded a Dickin Medal. For instance, the comically but fashionably named William of Orange, who saved over 2,000 soldiers with a single message carried over 250 miles in just over 4 hours. 10 years after his retirement, he was reportedly a, quote, grandfather of many outstanding racing pigeons. Our next good boy was actually a good girl with a badass name. Meet Sergeant Reckless, a United States Mongolian warhorse during the Korean War. And no, that's not just a funny title like calling a rabbit Captain Puffers. Reckless actually held the rank of Staff Sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. This absolute tank of a warhorse was purchased in 1952 off of a stable boy in Seoul, South Korea for 250 smackers. Apparently, the young fragile boy needed money to buy an artificial leg for his apparently even more fragile sister. Always some kind of Disney Pixar tragic backstory, isn't it? Reckless was taken in by the United States Marine Corps and trained to be a pack horse for a regiment specializing in anti-tank armaments. Not surprisingly, the platoon took to her very quickly, and she was immediately one of the gang, allowed to roam freely amongst the camp and poke her head in around the tents. Do you mind? She was known to eat nearly anything that was available. Chocolate, eggs, beer, the Marines' treasured supply of delicious and nutritious crayons. She even once ate a small pile of poker chips, if you could believe that. Alright, fellas, I'm all in.
God damn it, I fold.
Being a pack horse and all, Reckless's main duty was to carry supplies and ammunition to the battlefront, but she even managed to carry wounded off of the field to safety. And she was a pretty smart girl, learning her supply routes after only a few trips, unlike me who still uses the GPS to make sure I take the same exit that I've taken 50 times before.
Recalculating. Idiot.
But Reckless's claim to fame came in March of 1953 during the Battle for Outpost Vegas. In a single day, this heroic equine managed to make 51 resupply trips to the front lines solo. No handler needed. Across those trips, she totaled over 9,000 pounds of ammunition over 35 miles of travel. She is the definition of understanding the assignment. She did sustain 2 minor wounds in the battle, but was promoted to corporal shortly after the battle had ended, with another promotion to sergeant after the entire Korean War ended. For her services, she was awarded 2 Purple Hearts, a Marine Corps Good Conduct Medal, and was included in her unit's Presidential Unit Citations, among other military honors. Yeah, nothing could stop this anti-tank warhorse. Next up, Simon. Look at this handsome little man. Now, before you comment, no, this isn't Unsinkable Sam. This is Simon. How do I know? Well, his tag is for the HMS Amethyst, which is the ship that Simon served on, but I'll get to that in a bit. Just know that most of, if not all, stories of Unsinkable Sam mistakenly use Simon's picture instead, with his tag cropped out. It's quite the scandal, and I won't stand for it. Anyway, in 1948, on a cold Chinese morning in China, little Simon was doing cat things in a dockyard in Hong Kong. He was found by a 17-year-old naval seaman named George Hickenbottom, who was a crew member of the locally docked British frigate, the HMS Amethyst. But little Simon was not in such good condition. He was estimated to be about a year old at this point and was pretty malnourished. I'm going to keep you and love you forever. Meow. And so, Simon was smuggled onto the ship. However, due to small obvious signs of cat activity, Simon was almost immediately discovered, but was instantly adored by the crew. Because, I mean, come on. How could you not? Look at him. It ended up being a solid deal as Simon would hunt rats aboard the vessel, providing him a reliable source of food and ridding the crew of pests. Everything seemed well and good on a mission up the Yangtze River until the incident. Halfway up the river, the Amethyst came under fire from a group of Chinese People's Liberation Army field guns. The little bastards were absolutely relentless. The round struck the captain's quarters where Simon was stationed. He sustained serious wounds but was rushed to the medical bay for treatment. His burns were tended to and shrapnel was removed, but he was not expected to survive. But you should never doubt Simon. The fearless little feline ended up making a full recovery and went straight back to work because them rats got too comfy with him being out of commission for a bit. Simon's KC skyrocketed, along with the crew's morale. Mate's the captain, he's fucking dead. Don't ruin this for us.
After the incident, Simon became an instant celebrity, gaining publicity all over the world. For his services, he was granted the Dickon Medal, a Blue Cross Medal, and the Amethyst Campaign Medal. He was even given the rank of Able Sea Cat for his exceptional rat hunting abilities. Little Simon was a huge star. When he was finally able to move to his new home in England, Simon was required to be placed in quarantine per regulations. It was here that Simon tragically contracted a virus and was granted 50% opacity on November 28, 1949 at just 2 years of age. The entire Amethyst crew and hundreds of other adoring fans attended his funeral in the Ilford Animal Cemetery in East London, where he loafs bonily to this day. Moving on, we have this prestigious primate right here, Corporal Jackie the Baboon. His story begins in the 1910s in South Africa when he was found roaming around a farm. The owner, Albert Marr, took Jackie in as a pet because why not have a pet baboon? Over the next few years, the two grew close and were like family, but of course, the world decided to slam a wedge into the family as well as millions of other families around the globe when World War I broke out. Albert was drafted into the South African Army in 1915 but refused to leave Jackie at home, to which Albert's commanding officers were like, alright, the baboon can come. And so, Jackie was made the mascot for the 3rd South African Infantry Regiment, complete with his own little uniform with hat, rations, and his own little paybook. To no surprise, he was adored by the regiment. In true soldier fashion, Jackie would salute his superior officers, march with the regiment, eat with his own fork and knife, and would even light other soldiers' cigarettes. He was such a good boy. Outside of just entertainment and morale, Jackie proved to be a valuable asset to the team. His heightened senses allowed him to be alerted to incoming attacks well before human soldiers would be able to. The war did end up taking Jackie and Albert far from home, with one of their first major combat encounters being the Battle of the Somme in 1916 France. Both Jackie and Albert survived quite a few high casualty battles across their tour. While serving in Egypt, Albert was shot in the shoulder, and Jackie stayed with him and tended to his wounds while awaiting medical aid. Jackie, I don't know if I'm gonna make it, buddy. Nonsense, Albert. Despite both him and Albert sustaining wounds, they both survived the war. Jackie was awarded a Medal of Valor for his bravery and was promoted to corporal. Both he and Albert returned home to South Africa. Although Jackie managed to survive years under fire during the war, he ultimately perished in a fire in 1921 at home. But he was still a good boy. Now, unless you're a Hollywood elite, you don't often want to become friends with a natural predator. But the Polish military had a different idea in 1942 during a little-known event called World War II. A Syrian brown bear cub was adopted and given to the 22nd Artillery Supply Company of the Polish military. The troops instantly loved the bear because what else was there to do? They ended up naming him Wojciech, which loosely translates to Happy Warrior because he was a happy boy indeed. The troops raised the cub by feeding it condensed milk from a vodka bottle and then eventually various fruits and syrups. The bear grew attached to the soldiers, copying their every move. When the soldiers slept, he slept. When it was time for a nice morning coffee and cigarette, Wojciech would drink coffee and eat a cigarette. When being saluted, Wojciech would salute back. He was an ideal and loyal companion, despite being a giant fucking bear. After the company was assigned to fight alongside the British during the Italian campaign, the British displayed their signature racism against bears, forbidding Wojciech from being transported with the troops since he wasn't a soldier. So, as a big Pierre Doche to the Brits, Wojciech was immediately enlisted as a private into the Polish military. Oh, so you can have pigeons but you draw the line at bears? Whatever. Now officially being part of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company, his main job was to transport crates of ammunition to troops, which he was very successful at doing. He would lift large crates of artillery shells onto trucks, a job that normally required the strength of 4 men. It was noted that he never dropped a single crate, lest he obliterated his entire fan base and you wouldn't be hearing much about him today, other than that one idiot bear who dropped a bomb and killed everyone. For his work, he was promoted to corporal and became the official symbol of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. Once World War II peacefully concluded, Wojciech spent the rest of his days in the Edinburgh Zoo in Scotland, where he would be frequently visited by his military pals. Adoring fans would often toss cigarettes for Wojciech to munch on as a treat. He kicked the honeypot 16 years later at the age of 21. At ease, soldier. Although he never received any medals for his service, Wojciech was beloved by many across Europe and is immortalized with several statues across Poland, the UK, and even Italy.
Evil kings doing evil things. Again. It's always a roll of the dice when slapping a quivering child on the throne. Will they mature into a fair and caring leader, or will they go goo goo gaga bonkers and tear the country asunder? Well, it really depends on whoever raises them. For the case of young Charles IX, he was screwed from the get-go. Born in the Saint-Germain-en-Laye commune in north-central France back in old 1550, young Chuck had a lot to look forward to. He was the prince after all. Surely once his dear old dad had passed at a reasonably old age after bequeathing decades of knowledge and wisdom to his growing boy, Charles would do well to carry on that legacy. It's just too bad that Chuck's dad, Henry II, caught a honkin' hunk of splintered wood in his eyeball during a jousting tournament and died from an infection. Quite an embarrassing death, wouldn't you agree? But an embarrassing death is a death nonetheless, so for a reign to progress, a prince must acquiesce his distress and take to the throne with success. After his older brother died, of course. There we go. Now up to bat, Charles took the throne in 1560. The mathematically astute among you will realize that in 1560, the new monarch would be only 10, and you're correct. The compact little croissant was now king, but he couldn't reign his way out of a cloud. So until Charles came of age, the big britches of power were instead passed on to his mother, Catherine de' Medici, and she had plans of her own. It's important to acknowledge that during this time in France, there was a lot of religious squabbling, mainly between Catholics and Protestants. They both believe in the same God, sure, it's just that their teachings are slightly different, but different enough to kill each other. The Catholics were in the majority, with the Protestants, mainly a subsect called the Huguenots, being the persecuted rebellious few, making up about 10% of France's population. With ongoing violence slowly escalating over the years, Catherine proposed the Edict of January, basically stating, "Alright, we'll tolerate y'all, but cut the shit, behave yourselves, and follow the rules." But the more committed Catholics of the French government weren't too pleased with, at the very least, putting up with all of these heretical Protestants. One such outraged individual was Francis, Duke of Guise. He already had a bad experience with the Huguenots, having recently uncovered a plot to have him removed from power. His resulting rage culminated in the massacre of Vassy, where the aforementioned Duke found a stronghold of worshipping Huguenots gathered in a church on his land. So he killed a bunch of them. This event kicked off the first of several religious wars in France. But what does all of this have to do with Charles? Well, during the years of the on and off wars between the Catholics and the Protestants, Charles became a target. He had avoided assassination and abduction attempts from the Huguenots, making it harder for the king to empathize with them. After turning 13, Charles declared himself old enough to rule on his own, granting himself full authority, though he remained heavily influenced by Mama Medici. With thousands of his own people dead and royal coffers running dry, Charles needed to end these wars once and for all. So he hatched a plan. He had arranged the marriage between his very Catholic sister Margaret and devout Huguenot leader Henry of Navarre as an act of good faith and a final peace offering. The most wealthy and influential of the Huguenot leaders flocked to witness the wedding, but many would not make it home. With growing concerns and paranoia surrounding the influx of Huguenot leaders, Charles and his mother feared that a rebellion was on the horizon. So, on August 22nd, 1572, under the influence of his mother, Charles ordered the execution of Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, one of the main Huguenot leaders in town.
Mind your own business!
This murder sparked the infamous Bartholomew's Day Massacre, a systematic slaughtering of thousands of Huguenots within Paris. Homes and shops were raided, pillaged, and destroyed, and bodies were disrespectfully dumped in the Seine. Wanting to take advantage of the uprising as a way to strangle any remaining life of the Huguenots' power once and for all, some historians believe that Charles pushed for the violence to extend beyond the city, despite calling for an end to the violence a few days later to save face. Over the course of the next several weeks, tens of thousands of Huguenots were executed. The massacre, however, had the opposite effect. Unsurprisingly, the Protestants were now properly pissed off, initiating more religious wars that would last for another 26 years. King Charles would never live to see peace. The aftermath of the massacre drove the young king insane, shifting between bouts of boasting and remorse. One day he would be bragging about the extremity of the brutal bloodshed, while the next he claimed to be haunted by the screams of his victims. His mental health got flushed down the shitter as he constantly expressed immense grief over the incident. It also didn't help that Mama Medici made her son feel worse, giving him the full blame and declaring him a raving lunatic. In his now vulnerable and weakened state, the young king contracted tuberculosis in spring of 1574. King Charles IX coughed himself into the great beyond a few months later at the age of 23. Now, when you have a damning title like The Cruel, which admittedly is badass in and of itself, it's most likely one that was earned through various acts of ferocity, or just being a downright dick. So let's take a look at what Peter I of Castile did to obtain it. Born in 1334, the pint-sized Peter Pokemon evolved into a 6-foot-tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, chiseled chap. A hard worker and well-educated, the young prince had the qualifications to become a great leader, but he was being led by a bad example: his father. Daddy Alfonso XI was a ruthless king, but in that day and age, you kinda had to be. If you're too lenient, you're gonna get steamrolled by your enemies, but if you're too tyrannical, you're gonna catch a knife between your blades. Power! Alfonso, a man of strategy, worked tirelessly to expand his kingdom, arresting and executing any and all political opponents, often without trial. So it's pretty obvious where Peter's future policies may have been influenced. In 1350, King Alfonso XI himself caught an influential case of the Black Plague, which was ravaging Europe at the time, and ultimately dissolved from the throne, leaving it open to Peter. The determined prince donned the crown and became king of the Iberian kingdoms of Castile and Leon that same year. But it wasn't exactly a peaceful transition. Alfonso had a mistress who shot out multiple sons, half-brothers to Peter who wanted the throne for themselves, one in particular being Enrique. But we'll get to that later. King Peter was just 16 at the time of his crowning, so he sometimes took political advice from his still-alive mother. One such piece of advice was marrying the alliterative 14-year-old Blanche of Bourbon in 1353. Do you, King Peter, take Blanche to be your wife for life? Clearly not thrilled with this venture, Peter, just 2 days after marriage, abandoned Blanche for his side chick and ultimate love interest, Maria de Padilla, with whom he married in secret before bland-ass Blanche. They had 4 babies together. Yeah, that's how it works. As for Blanche, it's actually kind of a sad story. Peter not only abandoned her, but had her imprisoned in a town near the southernmost point of the Iberian Peninsula, far away from the kingdom. Though she was briefly a queen, Blanche died in captivity in 1361 under mysterious circumstances. Some historians believe that she was either poisoned or caught a crossbow bolt in the skull under Peter's command, though this is debated. Pretty cruel if you ask me. However, during his reign, Peter also earned the title of Peter the Just from his supporters. The king had attempted to centralize power away from wealthy nobles, giving platform to commoners and minority populations, particularly Jews and Muslims. The nobles, unsurprisingly, did not like that one bit. But since the king was king and all, any nobles who felt particularly rebellious or treasonous were given a peaceful view of the horizon, from a hanging rope. This trouble and turmoil among the ranks inspired a desire for someone to overthrow the crazed king. And who should show up but the various half-brothers from before? After many rebellions staged by said half-brothers, Peter captured and executed them all, including their mother. One brother was reportedly hacked to pieces as Peter looked on with a shit-eating grin. However, one brother managed to escape. Enrique evaded capture and fled to France, where he started to gather allies under French King John II. This caught the attention of another Peter, Peter of the neighboring kingdom of Aragon. Thus began the War of the Two Peters in 1356. Castile proceeded to kick Aragon's shit in, but Aragon had an ace up its sleeve. Yup, he was back. And now he was also backed by Aragon and the French. Enrique infiltrated Castile and actually managed to dethrone Peter, who ran away to England for backup in order to exact revenge, which he did. Peter regained his throne after the Battle of Nájera in 1367, but he failed to properly thank and pay tribute to the English for their help. Bad move. Now back at the helm, Peter systematically tortured and executed any and all nobles whom he deemed supportive of Enrique, oftentimes without proof. Peter lived in pure paranoia for the next few years, failing to trust any advisors or nobles, leading to a collapse in political power. Seeing the perfect opportunity for a critical final strike, Enrique attacked once more with the Battle of Montiel in March of 13 Nice. Peter was defeated and was stabbed in the freaking face with a knife by his half-brother who finally took the throne for good. Until he died of heart failure a decade later. In Chinese history, Di Xin of the Shang dynasty is a textbook example of how greed, corruption, and tyranny can twist a leader into moral depravity. After his death, Di Xin was given the posthumous title of King Zhou, with Zhou being the name of the part of a saddle that wraps around a horse's tail and brushes along its butthole. That's a rather creative insult, so you know this guy messed up something awful. Now, being an ancient king and all, historians are forced to rely on often very heavily exaggerated and embellished stories and legends, so for this chapter, take what you will with a grain of salt. Also, forgive my pronunciations. And also subscribe. Alright. King Butthole Strap began his reign in 1075 BC. According to ancient Chinese historian Sima Qian, the king was an exceptionally gifted fella, able to outsmart any opponent and strong enough to successfully hunt with nothing more than his bare hands. Doubtful, but whatever. Paired up with his favorite consort, the lovely and sadistic Da Qi, the two became a powerhouse of torture and torment for those unfortunate enough to be in their vicinity. Although remembered as a competent strategist, able to expand his empire through military campaigns, the king was blinded by his infatuation with Da Qi and drained the kingdom's coffers on extravagance. He was the king, and he truly wanted to live like one. According to legend, King Zhou would stop at nothing to fulfill the wishes of Da Qi, going as far as to build an elaborate palace garden crammed full of rare and exotic animals. Well, that's not too bad, you might say, with a bit of drool on your chin. Well, how about forcing royal subjects to drink from a freshly dug out wine pond or eat meat from hanging tree limbs? Oh yeah, they were all naked too. Where's all the hanging meat? I think I found it. These breezy brunches, along with any other over-the-top nonsensical nonsense, was funded solely by the taxpayers, which pissed them off.
You stupid.
The king's public support was nearly non-existent. It's just too bad that any outspoken individuals were subject to immediate imprisonment and torture. One such torture was the roasting beam, an invention of the king's own design. A long, hollow bronze beam positioned over a roaring fire. The roasting beam was stuffed with searing hot coals, transferring their heat to the highly thermoconductive bronze. The king would also take the time to grease up his long pole. According to legend, King Zhou had forced prisoners to walk across the pole, promising release if they were successful. They weren't. An alternate version of this torture device was flipped 90 degrees, a bronze column to which the victim was chained while a fire roared beneath them, cooking the victim to a delicate medium rare. You know, firm, but with a little give. The king and his main squeeze would reportedly revel in the pain inflicted on their prisoners, seeing the torment as pure cinema. Now, when you live life in excess and are tyrannical and maniacal dickbags to your starving and suffering subjects, it's pretty easy to understand that said subjects are going to want to murder you. Like, passionately murder you. King Zhou's relatives begged him to change his ways and shift towards a noble and kind rule. He would not be persuaded. At least, not until this handsome bag of biscuits showed up. This is Chifa of Zhou. Now, to clear some things up here, Zhou is not Zhou. This is Zhou. This is Zhou. Different inflection, different words. I don't know, man. The Chinese language is complicated. While evil-ass King Zhou was getting his rocks off watching dudes burn, Chifa was gathering an army. Refusing to be threatened, the king answered the call of war in the Battle of Moye in 1046 BC, but ultimately got his metaphorical socks knocked off so hard that he faced defeat. The greedy king then retreated into his palace, surrounded himself with his treasures, and, symbolic of the gilded dumpster fire that was his reign, set everything, including himself, ablaze at the age of 59. Da Qi, hearing of her beloved king's death, logged out of the server by strangling herself. Da Qi was ultimately blamed for the king's erratic behavior, believed by many to have been possessed by a demonic nine-tailed fox spirit, Naruto style. And thus, with the death of King Zhou, the Zhou dynasty came into power. How about that? The word terrible is tossed around like a frisbee at a blind picnic. So much so that it's lost its original meaning. Like the word literally. Sure, terrible can mean something exceptionally bad, but it also means something that instills terror or is sinister in nature, in essence, of pure evil. See, there's a difference between, ugh, this is terrible, and which is why Ivan was named as such, making for a terrible yet shareable parable. Continuing the trend in this video, Ivan began his reign young, being only 16 when crowned Tsar of all Russia in 1547. His early years as ruler were actually pretty peaceful and progressive. The Tsar had revised law code, established a standing army, and granted the rights of self-government to rural regions. But in 1553, Ivan was stricken with a near-fatal illness. Weak and weary on his deathbed, Ivan requested that his closest nobles swear allegiance to his son in the event of his death.
Please, my son.
I require many soggy oats.
What the fuck is that thing? They refused. This prompted Ivan to enact his plan B. Ivan's health eventually recovered, unlike his trust in his supposedly loyal nobles. The Tsar pushed to expand Russian territory with the hope of opening up opportunistic trade routes. Naturally, this instigated several battles of territorial control. Ivan saw many a success, but each at a deep cost of Russian resources. And then in 1558 came the Livonian War, a war aimed at taking control of Old Livonia, which would grant Russia much-needed access to the Baltic Sea. Facing off against the kingdoms of Sweden and Poland, along with Lithuania and other European strengths, Russia was devastated. The cost of this war threw the country into economic ruin, and it was only downhill from there for poor Ivan. Famine and drought ravaged the land, his friggin' wife died, and various betrayals caused the Tsar to spiral into a manic depression, even going as far as writing a letter of resignation from the throne. The nobles, terrified to rule the country themselves, begged for Ivan's return, which he agreed, but on one condition. He would be granted absolute power over every aspect of the country, including, and most importantly, the right to execute any traitors of the crown. They hesitantly agreed. Thus, Ivan returned to power with a tight, unrelenting grip. He immediately established the oprichniki, his very own personal guard. In exchange for wealth and privilege, these soldiers were Ivan's eyes and ears around the country, given the job of sniffing out any potential disloyalty. That great power remained completely unchecked. Under Ivan's rule, they executed and exiled thousands of nobles, seized their land, and harshly oppressed peasants. And things only got worse. By 1570, the iconic plague TM tore through the country, killing thousands by the day. Novgorod, one of Russia's most prominent cities, was crippled by plague, famine, and Ivan's ruthless rulings. Ivan himself feared that the entire city would defect to Lithuania, because yeah, that Livonian War was still going on during all of this, and so he decided to make a preemptive strike. In January of 1570, Ivan's oprichniki invaded the city and began their reign of terror. Those attempting to escape found it impossible as Ivan's forces had barricaded the city. They were trapped. Captives were tortured for information about their supposed plans for the betrayal of the crown, but none could speak of a truth that didn't exist. Citizens were either burned alive or tied up and thrown into the freezing river, suffocating under the ice. Farms surrounding the city were completely destroyed, condemning any already starving survivors to death without any possible sustenance. By the end of the massacre a few weeks later, thousands of people lay dead in Ivan's wake. Any and all valuables from homes, shops, and churches were stripped, taken back to Ivan's home in Moscow, and divided amongst the oprichniki soldiers. The Tsar's brutality had truly hit an apex, but it would soon hit a bit too close to home. On November 16, 1581, Ivan got in a heated argument with his 27-year-old son after having savagely beaten his pregnant daughter-in-law Yelena for being inappropriately dressed. The father-son altercation quickly rose to a boiling point, and Ivan lashed out, striking a single fatal blow across his son's head with a heavy cane. He had killed his own son. Worse yet, Yelena miscarried just hours later due to her injuries. Ivan collapsed to the ground, a broken man, holding his son's corpse. Before him flashed his own life of desolation and despair. After the incident, Ivan became remorseful for his past actions. In his final years, the Tsar had agreed to a truce with Lithuania, finally ending the 24-year-long Livonian War. He tied up all loose ends and made peace with himself, but this didn't stop his physical deterioration. By 1584, Tsar Ivan was a frail man. Although only 53, decades of physical and mental anguish destroyed his body and mind, not to mention long-term effects from mercury addiction. On March 28, 1584, Ivan suffered a stroke and died while playing a game of chess, causing two kings to fall at once.